The first thing we would find would not be a skeleton. It would be a mistake in the ground, a footprint pressed into ancient mud, hardened by time, uncovered by rain. At first, an archaeologist would think it belonged to an animal, maybe a bear, maybe some extinct ape. But then the shape would become clear. A heel, an arch, 5 toes, human, except the print is nearly half a meter long. And suddenly the entire story of our species would crack open. Because if ancient humans were giants, they could not hide from the earth. They would leave evidence everywhere, not tiny hints, not fragments that need decades of debate. Their existence would be written into landscapes like signatures carved with stone knives. Their footprints would be too deep. Their tools would be too large. Their shelters would be too wide. Their bones would not fit in our drawers, our museums, or our assumptions. A single giant femur would be enough to change everything. Not a myth, not a campfire story, not a blurry photograph passed around by people who want to believe. A real bone, measured, scanned, dated, compared. A thigh bone longer than a child. A pelvis built like a stone arch. Vertebrae thick enough to make doctors go quiet. That is where the real mystery begins. Because the question would not be, were they tall? The question would be, how did they survive? A giant human is not just a human made taller. That sounds simple, but nature is not simple. You cannot take a person and stretch them upward like a shadow at sunset. Bodies do not scale like drawings. When height increases, weight increases much faster. Bones carry more pressure. Joints absorb more punishment. Hearts push blood farther. Heat escapes differently. Hunger becomes a daily emergency. This is the secret rule behind giants. Size is power, but size is also debt. Every giant pays interest. So let us build one from the ground up. Start with the feet. A giant human could not have delicate, narrow feet. Their feet would need to spread weight like snowshoes. Every step would drive force into the earth. Mud would remember them. Sand would collapse under them. Snow would betray their path for days. They would be terrible at disappearing. Then the legs, long, yes, strong, yes, but not graceful in the way we imagine. A giant built for survival would need heavy joints, broad knees, and massive tendons. Their walk might be smooth, but careful. Less like a superhero landing from the sky, more like an elephant crossing a frozen lake, aware that weight is both weapon and risk. Now the spine. This is where fantasy starts to fail. Humans already carry one of evolution's strangest compromises. We walk upright with a column of bone that was modified from ancestors who moved on 4 limbs. Lower back pain is not a modern joke. It is a souvenir from evolution. Make a human much larger, and the spine becomes a bridge under constant stress. A giant human would need a reinforced back, thick abdominal muscles, a wider pelvis, and probably a posture that would look slightly different from ours. Not hunched like a monster, but not identical either. Their body would reveal the fact that upright walking at giant size is not easy. And then comes the heart. Imagine a heart that must pump blood to a brain nearly 3 meters off the ground. Giraffes solve this with extreme blood pressure and specialized vessels. A giant human would need its own solution. Perhaps a larger heart, stronger arteries, and a body designed to avoid sudden fainting when standing up too quickly. That one detail changes how you see them. They are no longer just huge hunters. They are living engineering problems. Their bodies would be masterpieces of compromise, and hunger would follow them like a shadow. A giant cannot snack their way through survival. They would need serious food, dense food, reliable food, meat, marrow, fish, shellfish, nuts, tubers, fat, especially fat. In the ancient world, fat was not a guilty pleasure. It was survival stored in flesh. A mammoth's body was not just meat. It was energy, heat, tools, glue, shelter, memory. For a giant human group, one bad season could be catastrophic. Smaller humans can survive on less. They can scatter. They can hide in marginal places. They can squeeze through forest, climb, forage, improvise. Giants would be more tied to abundance. Big rivers, open plains, herd migrations, coastlines where the sea delivered calories in waves. Their lives would revolve around finding enough, not because they were primitive, but because their biology demanded strategy. That might make giant humans some of the greatest planners in prehistory. They would know where the herds crossed in late autumn. They would know which valley held edible roots when snow came early. They would know which cliffs trapped wind, which caves flooded, which frozen lakes could carry their weight, and which could not. Their intelligence would not be displayed in marble cities or metal machines. It would be displayed in not dying. Now imagine their tools. This is where the archaeological record would become almost surreal. A hand axe made for a giant would look ceremonial to us, as if it belonged to a king in a myth. A scraper might be too heavy for a modern person to use for more than a minute. Spear shafts would be thick, long, and dangerous even before they were sharpened. A wooden thrusting spear in the hands of a giant would not be just a weapon. It would be a boundary. A lion understands boundaries. A bear understands risk. A pack of hyenas understands when a meal is too expensive. Most predators are not villains. They are accountants of danger. They calculate injury, hunger, opportunity, and a circle of giant humans around a fire would be a very bad investment. But here is the twist. Giants might not be better hunters in every way. They would be powerful at close range. They could drive a spear with terrifying force. They could butcher heavy carcasses, move logs, break bones, lift stones, and stand their ground against animals that would make us freeze. But they might be worse at stealth, worse in thick forest, worse on cliffs, worse in caves, worse anywhere the world becomes narrow. A smaller human can vanish behind shrubs. A giant turns shrubs into noise. A smaller human can climb after birds' eggs. A giant risks death from a fall that a lighter body might survive. A smaller human can live on scraps for a few days. A giant begins to burn through reserves. So the giants would not rule Earth like fantasy kings. They would rule certain places in certain seasons, under certain conditions. That is more interesting than invincibility. It means their world would have borders. Maybe the giants dominated cold grasslands, walking between mammoth herds, beneath skies full of migrating birds. Maybe they avoided dense jungle, where heat trapped them and insects found every fold of skin. Maybe they loved coastlines, where whales stranded, seals bred, fish ran silver through rivers, and shellfish waited in rock pools like nature's storage jars. A giant society would not look like ours made larger. Their camps would have different geometry. The hearths would be bigger, not for drama, but because more bodies needed heat. Sleeping spaces would be spread farther apart. Shelters would need heavy frames and wide entrances. A doorway tells you what kind of body a house expects. If archaeologists found ancient shelters with entrances too tall for us and roof supports too thick for ordinary hands, the building itself would testify. Even their trash would be enormous. Broken bones smashed for marrow, shell piles rising like walls, wood ash from fires that burned hot and long, stones cracked from repeated use. A giant camp would smell strongly of smoke, hides, blood, wet earth, and cooked fat, and their children would be the center of everything. This may be the most human part of the entire idea. A giant baby would still be helpless, maybe dangerously helpless. The larger the adult body, the more complicated growth becomes. If babies were born too large, childbirth would be deadly. If babies were born smaller and grew slowly, they would need years of care. Either way, giant childhood would create giant responsibility. A young giant would have strength before wisdom. Think about that. A child who can accidentally injure someone by playing too rough. A teenager whose anger could break a tool that took days to make. A growing body that needs endless food, but cannot yet hunt like an adult. Their culture would have to teach control, not as a moral luxury, as survival. Maybe their first lessons were not about courage, but gentleness. How to step around infants. How to carry fire. How to touch a smaller person without hurting them. How to hold power in the body without letting it leak into violence. That idea changes the giant myth completely. The true mark of a giant civilization might not be huge weapons, it might be discipline. Now introduce another human group into this world, us, or something like us. Smaller, lighter, quicker, less expensive to feed. We arrive at the edge of giant territory and see their smoke first, then their tools, then in damp ground near a river, one of their footprints filled with rainwater. What would we feel? Terror, probably, then curiosity, then calculation, because humans do not simply run from the unknown. We study it. We talk about it. We turn it into stories before we understand it. The giants would look at smaller humans and see something strange too. Fragile creatures, maybe child-sized to them but clever, fast hands, sharp eyes, good at slipping through places giants avoid, good at carrying less, eating less, vanishing more easily. Conflict is easy to imagine, but cooperation might be even more powerful. A mixed hunting party would be extraordinary. Smaller humans tracking and scouting ahead, giants waiting near a natural trap, fires placed to guide animals, spears ready, voices low. The hunt would not be about brute strength alone. It would be a choreography between bodies of different scale. Trade could emerge. Giants might provide heavy labor, protection, access to large carcasses. Smaller humans might provide delicate tools, ornaments, medicines, information about distant groups, maybe even new ways of making clothing and traps. But peace would always have a shadow. When food grows scarce, size becomes political. A hungry giant group is not just hungry, it is a moving pressure on the land. A valley that feeds a small band for weeks might feed giants for days. Smaller humans might avoid them in winter. Giants might see smaller humans as competitors who steal quietly and vanish. This is how legends become complicated. Not all giants would be monsters. Not all would be gentle. They would be people. And people are never one thing. Some groups might be remembered as protectors, others as raiders, some as ancestors, some as warnings. The same giant who saves a child from a bear in one story becomes the terrifying figure beyond the hills in another. Over thousands of years, memory loses detail and keeps emotion. A footprint becomes a myth. A huge bone becomes a relic. A real neighbor becomes a giant. But if they existed, why are they gone? The answer might be painfully simple. The world changed. Large animals often live close to the edge. They need more food, mature slowly, and recover slowly when numbers fall. A few bad generations can become an extinction. Climate shifts, herds move, forests spread, rivers change course. The cold plains shrink. The animals giants depended on vanish or become harder to find. And smaller humans develop better tools. That detail matters. At close range, a giant with a spear is terrifying, but technology changes distance. A well-thrown spear, a spear thrower, a bow, traps, coordinated fire drives, these reduce the advantage of size. Once danger can arrive from far away, being large becomes less protective. A giant is harder to miss. Their strength would still matter, but not enough. The decline would not happen like a movie. No final battlefield under a red sun. More likely, it would be quiet. Fewer children surviving winter. More time spent searching for food. More injuries that never fully heal. Smaller bands. Empty camps. Old migration routes that lead to herds no longer there. The last giants might not even know they are the last. They would only know that the world feels wider and emptier than the stories promised. One evening, perhaps, a giant family shelters beneath an overhang while snow falls beyond the firelight. An elder lifts a hand to the wall and presses red pigment around the fingers. The handprint is not a claim of ownership. It is a message without words. We were here. We were warm once. We had names. Thousands of years later, smaller humans find it. They stand below the print and raise their own hands toward it, unable to reach. And in that moment, the giant is not a monster anymore. The giant is an absence shaped like a person. In the real fossil record, we have found no evidence for a lost race of towering ancient humans. No confirmed giant villages. No enormous human skeletons that rewrite biology. The truth is already strange enough. Our family tree included powerful Neanderthals, mysterious Denisovans, small island humans, and populations adapted to mountains, ice, forests, and coasts. Humanity was never one simple form, but imagining giants reveals something that facts alone sometimes hide. It shows that evolution does not reward the biggest creature automatically. It rewards the body that fits the moment. Sometimes that body is huge, sometimes it is small. Sometimes survival belongs to teeth and claws. Sometimes it belongs to patience, memory, and a needle made from bone. A giant human would still need fire, still need language, still need elders, still need children to listen, still need someone to share food when the hunt failed. That is the surprise. Make humans enormous, and the most important thing about us does not get bigger. It becomes clearer. Our bodies matter, but our real power has always been between bodies. The shared plan, the warning call, the taught skill, the remembered path, the story that turns one person's mistake into everyone's knowledge. If ancient humans were giants, they might have shaken the ground when they walked, but they would still gather around fire because the dark was bigger than them. They would still look up at stars they could not touch. They would still lose people they loved. They would still leave marks behind, hoping the future would not forget. And maybe that is why the idea of giants stays alive. Not because we need them to be real, but because they make us ask a better question. What actually made us human? Was it height, strength, the ability to dominate the landscape? Or was it the fragile, stubborn habit of reaching for each other in a world that was always too large? A giant could tower over a forest. A giant could stare down a predator. A giant could carry a spear longer than a modern person is tall. But alone, hungry, injured, and cold, even a giant becomes small. And that may be the most powerful image of all. Not a giant conquering the ancient world. A giant kneeling by a fire, teaching a child how to make tomorrow.